Hey everyone, it's Justin with another KTOD video on Star Wars Unlimited, this time looking at the top 10 most powerful cards from set 2, along with a bonus section at the end talking about some of the more overrated cards I've seen in the spoilers, along with some sleepers. So let's actually jump right into the list. Starting us off is Maul, 7 cost command villain card with ambush. We've seen that before in set 1 with Darth Vader. And now we have a different approach, a little bit more aggressive, less of a card value, 2-for-1 type of ability. But now we're talking about just direct power. Ambush, overwhelm together is something I don't believe we've seen on one card. You can see you can get that very powerful combination with ECL, but now we have it exactly sort of packaged into one card. Um, I think it is a pretty cool build around, and that you can think about replacing Darth Vader using this card, or sort of adding consistency, where now you have the ability to go up to 6 copies of a Ambush 7-drop that has an immediate impact, and it's going to impact the game. So you can sort of build around always having this ability, or you can think about, okay, I want to get really, really aggressive, and Maul's actually going to replace Vader in some decks. So a powerful card and also an exciting sort of decision point as we build some of these decks in set 2. All right, next on the list is Crate Dragon. At first, I dismissed this card as sort of being really high up the cost curve and not really going to have a big impact. The ability was cool, but thinking about, it's just going to die, or we're never going to get to that turn. But now I've played with it a bit more. Ramping into it is really, really powerful. Just slamming it in control mirrors is super powerful as well. Just grinding down those base life points. So I think this card's going to be a player in the set 2 meta. I think similar to Avenger, that became a very powerful finisher for many control decks. I think Crate Dragon is going to have a big impact in a different way, right? Avenger sort of has that lock. Crate Dragon's going to have more of an impact on damage. You could see this um, card playing a role in sort of getting those last points out against control, and just having like a really, really powerful stat line of 10-10 overwhelm. And if you're able to ramp this out a little bit early, it's always going to be doing a ton of damage. So pretty impressive card. Crate Dragon as a control finisher, and just answer to opposing controls as well. All right, coming in at number 8 is a very different type of card. Our first 2 cards were units, both legendary and rare. Now we have a common, timely intervention. It's allowing you to sort of have that ECL ability with any unit for a cost of 1 or 2 smuggle cost. I think as we're seeing these more powerful units come out, and command being one of the more powerful uh, aspects in Star Wars Unlimited, that this card allowing sort of that second ECL to happen in maybe a Sabine deck or maybe a Boba deck, command Sabine, command Boba, where you've got your ECL, and now you're going to also get later in the game, maybe you're going to play a Wrecker in Sabine with timely intervention, or a Poe Dameron. These sort of pushed units were able to use our ECL ability on more than just that once per game. When do I pull the trigger to use ECL? This has been a big part of the set 1 game in-game decisions, and now you've got the ability to sort of bank on it a second time. So I think we'll see this card played. I don't always think it's a 3 of index. I don't think you just slam it no matter what. But if you've got sort of more of a mid-range game, and you want some closers, it's really powerful. It's also super powerful with if you have a lot of overwhelm cards in your deck. The smuggle cost is great, that you can sort of bank it, and then in the mid-range, sort of I'm living off the top of my deck type of game. Now all of your cards have ambush. So I think we'll see this as a player in the set 2 meta. Sticking around with the smuggle theme, Hotshot Blaster. At first, I thought this card would just be absolutely bananas in everything. Now I think it is a little bit more nuanced with the decisions, um, in that there's not in the yellow red decks, it's an obvious include if you have any type of aggression. The soul red decks are probably not going to play it. So now you're looking at almost only its smuggle cost, and let's say a double yellow Boba type of deck, or really any Boba deck or any yellow aggression deck. Do you just play it for its smuggle cost, and sort of being able to use it as a surprise strike type of card that you can resource early. And also bank on that as the game goes on, knowing that if you have a unit and you're thinking about action claiming and or initiative claiming, that you sort of can do the math so that your highest power unit, along with this card, can end the game. So you're not necessarily counting to 30 or 25. You might be counting to a much lower number if you can say attack with a 4 power unit that now is 6. So you're able to end the game with that. And knowing that from an early stage of the game is great. So I think this card's going to be a finisher for a lot of aggressive cunning decks. All right, so this one's gotten a lot of chatter, Daring Raid, as sort of the Star Wars Unlimited version of Shock. I'm less high on this card. I do think it has a major impact on the meta. And I think it's obviously got as a great it's great to get that extra 2 points when you're trying to close the game as an aggressive deck. Maybe you're trying to close against control, and you're just trying to grapple onto that last point of damage, where your units that you're drawing off the top oftentimes won't get it done if opponents got sort of units to answer yours if they've gone bigger at that point. So I do think that damage for aggressive decks is going to be relevant. Um, and I do think it has an impact on the meta where we can now use this to kill like a probe droid. So we'll see less 2 hit HP units being played on the first turn. Where I don't think it's exactly a shock is that it doesn't answer a large percentage of turn 1 plays the way that like Shock would in Magic the Gathering. So I think this card's very powerful. I just don't think it's sort of okay. They play any unit on turn 1, you're able to kill it. Most of the time, this is not going to kill their turn 1 play, and you'll see decks built to essentially make this card never be a single answer to a card. So I like it. I think it's very powerful. I could see red decks getting better in set 2, but I just don't think it's quite as hyped. It doesn't match quite the hype, although it's still in my top 10 list. Staying in line with the red sort of new world of aggression, though, is Bo-Katan. This card is absolutely crazy. Um, I think it's a good principle to think of for aggressive decks. You want to draw cards and put pressure on early. Bo-Katan does a great job there. Turn 1, 3/3. But then sometimes those cards become not so great draws later on in the game. Well, Bo-Katan has text that allows you to be very happy if you draw this card on turn 1, and very happy if you draw this card on turn 8 if you're trying to play a unit, and then if it dies and they're in the removal world, you still get to draw cards most likely. So super powerful card. I can certainly see aggression decks spiking with set 2 with Bo-Katan along with Daring Raid and other cards, also combining with the powerful card, which my teammate KTOD Maddie has talked about, aggression. So I think we're going to see an uptick in aggressive red decks moving forward. And one final note on Bo, not a hero card, right? So you can play this in like a Kylo red deck or a Vader red deck as a really sort of efficient unit. Okay, at 4 we have Toro Calican. I think we all looked at this guy when he first came out and we said, who's this guy? He's got 3/5 stats. Those stat lines pretty good, just like Boba Fett. And then sort of the slow trickle of like, wait a second, this guy can untap and attack for 3. Well, that's good. It's pretty hard to kill him right away, so it's kind of cool that he gets to get in there again. But then you realize that with upgrades and various pump effects like Cunning or Kylo Ren Leader's text to pump him up, this guy can actually attack twice for maybe 5 damage, maybe 6 damage, with Cunning 7 damage. And if you're able to ever stack those abilities and then attack with him twice, that's just so much damage. And the cost to do this isn't all that much. I mean, the only cost is to play a bounty hunter and have Toro live. Well, Toro's stats are really good, and bounty hunters are really good. You're thinking about Forlom and Bosk and 3-cost Boba Fett, and so this is a really powerful effect. It's not so much like a combo card where you're attacking with him 50 times. It is limited to once per turn, but I do think Toro is going to be a major player in set 2 and is able to sort of push a lot of damage in these mid-rangey aggro matchups where he can potentially get you ahead in a race very quickly. All right, coming in at number three, speaking of upgrades, is the Dark Saber. This, I think, is one of my favorite cards in set two. Very powerful effect of +4 damage. So if you're able to play this and attack with the unit that you play it on in that turn, it's causing that extra 4 damage to a base, and you're pulling ahead. I think this card's very powerful in Sabine. I've been a big champion of Sabine Green during the entirety of the set one meta. But obviously, playing it on Sabine, who is a Mandalorian leader, on the fourth resource turn, the turn you flip her, can result in 7 damage right away. And if they don't answer it, then that's another 7. And 14 damage to a base is very hard to come back to, especially when you're dealing with Sabine and all the pings and other damage that they're able to accrue. So I can see this card being very, very powerful, where you're going to talk to your friends at a major in the fall once we get OP, and it's going to say, hey, what happened? Oh, I lost. What happened? My opponent played a Dark Saber, and I didn't have an answer. There are some very cheap, good answers to this card. It's going to take a little bit of nuance to know exactly when to play it. But I think its ability is just so powerful that we're going to see a lot in set two. All right, next up, and coming in at number two is Bazine Nal. This started out as like, okay, another discard card, pretty powerful, to then playing with it and play testing and looking like Apple stock in the early 2000s, where it was just rising and rising and rising and rising. You'd see playtest reports where people would say, oh, yeah, I played and I would have lost, but I drew Bazine and played her and took my opponent's Super Laser Blast, or took my opponent's Overwhelming Barrage, or took my opponent's only unit that they had to play, and then they drew air and I won. So this card has resulted in a lot of winning when it comes into the game. In a similar way, very different way, this is a 2-drop that is okay on turn one, and on the play, when you have initiative, can potentially take their only play on turn one. So that's sort of the very high value potential of a turn one play on this card. But the real benefit is playing this card later in the game, sort of the middle to late game, where you need to nab that one card that's going to save the opponent, that one card that's going to 2-for-1 you or 3-for-1 you, like an Overwhelming Barrage or a Darth Vader. And this card really does the trick there, and slots into one of the best decks in Star Wars Unlimited, which is Cunning Boba, and also Command Boba. So I think we'll see a lot of this card, and I'm excited to see the stories on this one too, of, oh yeah, I was going to win, and then my card got discarded, and I drew nothing. So really powerful ability here. All right, coming in at number one is a tie, which means I'm probably going to get some criticism on my math here, meaning that all the previous numbers are actually one lower. Sure, okay, it's actually a top 11 list. I lied, but I think Poe and Wrecker are absolutely amazing. They give hero aggression just these two insane finishers, where if you think about a deck like a Sabine prior, sometimes you would run out of gas, and as the opponent got to the middle of the game, thinking about a matchup like against a Boba, that you wouldn't be able to compete with units like Bosk or Boba Leader or Darth Vader or any of these sort of high-end cards, and you'd be outgunned. Well, reinforcements have arrived in a big way with Poe Dameron and Wrecker. They are now the big boys in town. They work very well together, where opponent has to kill your Poe if it hits, and then Wrecker can come in the next turn and really finish the job. Obviously, they both work incredibly well with ECL, but I think we'll see these in all types of aggression hero decks, from Red Han, both Hans, if Sabine, obviously, some ramp decks that we'll see these guys in. I think these guys are just completely baller. Poe being legendary, that's the card I would be looking at trying to acquire the most in terms of the economy of set two. So I would get your orders in now for Poe, but Wrecker is equally powerful, and it's hard to rank one above the other. And I'm super excited to play with these guys. Okay, so that's my top 10 list. I'm excited to hear your comments, what you think is not there. I will say it was a really, really tough process to slim this down to 11 cards. There was a lot of cards that I initially had in my top 10 that I ended up moving out. Um, so let's jump into that now a little bit and talking about some sleepers and some cards that are going to have a big impact in set two that maybe weren't on this list. So bonus section of sleepers here. The first one I think is probably not so much a sleeper, but just Cloud Rider. This guy is I talked a little bit about Daring Raid not sort of being that answer to a turn one play always. Well, Cloud Rider oftentimes it's going to kill almost any turn one unit, um, with the exception of some X4s and shielded units. So it's going to have an immediate impact. Thinking about killing like a battlefield marine right away, and combined with some of the leaders gives even more value, like Boba Fett on tapping, or Cad Bane dealing that extra damage because it's an underworld unit. So not so much a sleeper, but I had Cloud Rider at times being in the top 10 on my list, but I just couldn't make it happen. Sundari Peacekeeper is another X5 at the 3-drop spot. Life gain and raid. It's going to stick around. It's a sticky unit. I think we'll see that decision metric of how to place all these 3-drops is going to be a big one. See Cassie in there as well. I think both of these guys are somewhat competing for the job in Sabine decks. Um, but I could see Sundari Peacekeeper being a card that keeps you alive against aggro decks and ramp decks, getting you to your Crate Dragon or whatever you're ramping towards. Um, Boba Fett's armor has been a sleeper for me. Again, I'm a big fan of yellow Boba and also green Boba and really all shades of Boba. And this card just makes your unit Boba so hard to kill and really a major clock at attacking for 6 damage. I think if you've played a lot of Boba in set one, you know that your Boba leader usually is good for a turn or two to push some damage, but then does generally get outpaced in these mid-range games. He's going to die at some point, and putting the armor on makes him a real threat, and it makes him very hard to remove. Um, I mentioned Cassian a bit, but I think he's going to be very powerful in Sabine, and the ability to use him as smuggle too. When you're thinking about building decks with lots and lots of 3-drops, well, now you've got the ability to smuggle him and resource him early, knowing that it's not completely throwing a card away. Evacuate's a legendary that I think could be a sleeper. Bridges the gap for the control cutting decks and villain to Super Laser Blast, and also has some really interesting synergies with waiting a turn on the Boba flip turn to get a ton of value. I'm not sure we'll always see that, but it's an interesting dynamic that I'm excited to see play out a little bit more. Okay, so that's my first wave of sleepers for set two. Now let's talk about a few overrated cards. And when I say overrated, I generally mean overrated by me. I think on our podcast, we do our good, bad, and broken segment, and I've had a lot of these cards as broken very early on, and I've now changed course a bit with them. Kylo's Tie is a very fine, aggressive turn one play in space. And I was very excited about this card initially, and then they just made a whole bunch of cards that trade with it in set two. There's already a whole bunch of cards that are very good against it in set um, one. You see Daring Raid this is a target for Daring Raid where Daring Raid can just kill it. So I think it's powerful. The ability is also somewhat of a nombo with Kylo leader, where you actually don't want to sort of gain the card advantage because you want to dump your hand. So discarding Kylo Ren's tie to Kylo is sort of anti-proactive to the mission of dumping your hand. So Kylo's tie, fine card. I think it's going to see play, just not quite as special as when it first came out. Palpatine's Return is a card that I thought was going to be fantastic. Graveyard synergies and TCGs are generally very powerful. Haven't seen that a ton in Star Wars Unlimited, and I don't see it happening right now yet. I think the big trigger point for this card not being that powerful is just that there's a lot of units that are coming in at 6 that are very powerful on their own. You think about like a Fett's Fire Spray, and having sort of to piece this together with your graveyard and this card at 6 just seems like a lot of work. And then the units that you're able to discount, well, they're coming in the next turn, so ramping is oftentimes better. So you're thinking about, Vader and the new Maul, or the Palpatine, the red Palpatine. Those are the cards that I want to maybe play earlier using Palpatine's Return. Well, I can just resupply or Super Laser Tech into those cards anyway. So obviously you could merge the two, but it's just too many things that have to sort of go right for this card to have a huge value at this point. In a similar line, McClunky, I think, is going to see some play, but it's again, it's situational where you've got to have these very specific lines and board states for it to have its max value, where you're trying to kill someone and gain tempo, but then you're bouncing a unit to your hand, which is sort of the opposite of that. So I do think McClunky's going to have some value. It's just that it doesn't always work that you have the Greedo and the McClunky and the resources to replay a unit and sort of get that tempo and stay aggressive at the same time. Django Fett was an early spoiler, and I think we all looked at his stats and his ability, and we said, yeah, this card's going to be a real efficient card, and he's just gotten outpaced when we've seen other spoilers. We're seeing all these very powerful 3/5s for 3. Um, I think he'll be good in bounty decks, clearly, the boss deck. He is going to be a player there, but he's not just an auto-include into, say, like a Vader deck that might be killing a few units and drawing a ton of cards. I don't see him being that kind of all-inclusive aggression villain card that I saw him initially. And then the last one is a new adventure. I know a lot of people really love this card, but similar to McClunky, it's too situational to me. The payoff is higher on playing like a Bosk or a Fett's Fire Spray, and using that ability again and attacking twice and so on and so forth. But um, I just think these situational cards are a bit too magical Christmas land to value. So I think that card's a little bit overrated. I'd say that a new adventure is probably the one I'm um, most likely to be wrong on. And I can see this card being a player, but I haven't seen it make an impact at enough consistent rate so far in playtesting. All right, wrapping this up now. Hope you've enjoyed the video, but wrapping up with two final, potentially controversial takes. The first one is the most underrated card, which is DJ. This was the last legendary spoiled. And I think most people looked at him at first and said, 3/5 for 3. Well, we've already seen the really powerful 3/5 for 3s like Toro. And this guy doesn't totally have text. He's playing with Smuggle 7. That seems like a lot. But the fact that he can delay leader flips, I think is really interesting to me. Thinking about as an answer to like a Palpatine or a Vader or some of these later leader flips. If you're able to claim, knowing that you have DJ in your resource row that you've done earlier, that's a really powerful ability. Obviously, doesn't work against ramp that same way because you're not going to be ramping in a double yellow deck. But having that inevitability to potentially delay a leader flip, potentially stop a card like a Super Laser Blast, just seems really, really powerful to me. And because you're going to play him in a deck with lots of 3s, you're going to be faced with the decision about, most likely, to have 2 3-drops in your hand, and he's sort of a clear choice to resource with some upside later on in the game. But he's also just a fine unit if you don't have those double 3-drops to play on that second turn of the game. So I think this guy's intriguing. He's not in my top 10, clearly, but I think this guy could be a player, and we will see him at some top tables this summer and the fall. All right, final slide is my most overrated card, controversial take, and that is Cobb Vanth. I had this guy as a 10 out of 10 most broken card in the set when he first came out. Pure value, free is printed on him. But he has dropped significantly for me. I think the issue is that he's competing against units at the 3-drop spot that are just so much better than he is. His stats line up with a 2-drop that's not a good 2-drop even. A 3/2 for 2 wouldn't be something I was interested in playing right now. So you're playing a not very good body on 3 to then die and play another 2-drop. Now, the 2-drops can be very powerful. I've got Bazine along with Bo-Katan, although Bo-Katan doesn't exactly work with him. But it's a lot of work. It's also another action. So there's times where you sort of, to use his ability, you're also essentially saying that you're not going to have the initiative. And I just haven't been that impressed. He takes sort of another card with him, like a surprise strike, to sort of trade up with a unit, and then you're he's still going to die anyway. Um, and then you're playing a 2-drop with all that work for free. So don't love him. I could see him certainly being played, but I just think he's pretty overrated at this point. He's moved from my main deck to like, oh, I'll sideboard him against control, quickly gets outpaced against control, and he just becomes sort of a non-factor. So curious your thoughts on that. There's your thoughts on all my lists. Obviously, these are all predictions, so we'll see what happens. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.